Hello. Welcome to any combo lords joining me. I know it's very dark out here. Don't worry, our main stream will be taking place in an indoor location where we'll have human-made lights. In fact, our main stream, I wanted to fiddle around with a piano that was available at our setting today. But first, I wanted to gather a few clocks because pianos are somewhat like clocks, and a clock may come in handy to explain some of the things going on in piano math that we may look at today. And I was going to run out and grab a clock before the stream, but I figured, why don't we grab a clock together? So we get a quick glimpse of the combo classroom to start, and so if anyone, for some reason, does not know our combo style yet and stops by the live stream's beginning, maybe they'll note, if they can see this, that we have many clocks. We like clocks and cycles, and I'm going to bring this one as a separate cycle. This is a rarer clock that was mailed to the combo mailbox recently by my guy Stick, who is one of my moderators and combo lords, and this gives us a weekday cycle. And of course we're also going to need our more typical hours and minutes, because believe it or not, the cycles on these happen to line up somewhat coincidentally with the cycles that worked well for pianos to settle into after a long history of falling into what's known as the 12-tone music scale that Western music uses nowadays. And there's actually mod 7 and mod 12 in their mathematical names, both in the weekday clock thing and in the pianos. So it turns out that clocks are a perfect example, and so are weekdays, of certain things going on inside a piano. Now, let's bring these in, and this is going to be a little change of pace and location. I will also give a quick glimpse of some future chaos you will see related to clocks. This is clock related, but I'm not going to show you how it happened, but those were / are, depending how you define existence, they either were or are clocks. Yeah, those are the cheap little extra ones that kept falling off everything, and perhaps they had a dramatic finale. And that's for one of the episodes that I'm filming out of a few coming forward. It's not in the next one I'll release, which, another mysterious, quick, not really spoiler of the premise of my arc of the episode, but spoiler of some of the diagrams we might use, perhaps. The next one will be related to, I'm not sure if you can see any of that, a clock-like thing as well. It's a clock-like cycle that the Fibonacci numbers do. And let's move indoors, because my battery's low as well. But in the next main episode we'll be doing, coming out on my combo class channel, we will have a clock-like pattern show us some cool things about the Fibonacci sequence. And we did talk about the Fibonacci sequence relatively recently on that channel. So sometime in the next couple days, might want to make sure you've seen my golden ratio episode, because the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence are great friends. They show up in and around each other all over. I'm going to head toward the front, and I'm going to have to be cautious about getting us to this piano without showing anything like my address, so bear with me. But we're going to bring these clocks toward a cool piano. What I was saying, though, is that in this episode coming up, we will have... Sorry, it's a little precarious around here, carrying the clock and a lantern and a laptop and another clock. We will have a new look at the Fibonacci sequence, not in terms of its relationship with the golden ratio, but the next combo class episode will be about the Fibonacci sequence's relationship with modular arithmetic. our clock-like math that spins around numbers. Now, let me be careful aiming this. Don't want to show any addressy stuff. And now we are in the main location of our stream. The main location today is actually going to be in my family's living room because there's a piano here, and I live here with my family, and my parents are out of town. They might be watching this if they randomly are. Hi. Probably not. And this living room, usually I don't want to come out and use the whole piano on streaming a thing for an hour or two because it takes up the whole house and doesn't let other people coexist as well. But today, we have a little gap of time. My brother may come back through, might even make a cameo at some point. But while my parents were gone, it is a good time to show some fun piano math. We also will get possibly more cat cameos. Here's the little fella Sassafras. We gotta get at least a little cameo of each of them. Hey, Sass. Come here. Sassafras. So this is the one that used to be Stray. I don't know if you can see him. Can you see him down there? That's Sassafras. He's a love boy now. He was a stray, and now he will come first thing in the morning begging for pets before food. He'll let me rub his belly. He's never bit or scratched me. He is so nice. All right, Sass. We're going to do a stream. You can hang out. He does get spooked easily, so I'm kind of dancing around him because I don't want to spook him away too quick. Of course, there's Dandelion and Sage, who may make cameos as well. Now, that was my dark clock moving phase, where to actually take advantage of what we did, why don't we add our clock as a visual demonstration of some of these modular music cycles. And now I will take a peek at our chat. Oh no, I need to charge this. Let me grab a charger. I will plug this in, then take a peek at our chat. Alright, just plugging us in, then we won't have to think about it yet. Alright, who wants to come in? Cats? Cats? Alright, the remainder of them are out. So, if they want to come back in, they can hop in my window. Here is our weekday clock. There is our other clock. And we don't need our lantern for a bit. Maybe we will pop back out to the strange clock realm, the classroom, right at the end of the stream. So, welcome to everybody who has joined me. Somebody's mentioning 5 workdays for 5 black keys. That is a good additional observation, and we can note that we have 7 is typically the cycle I was referring to in terms of a colored key and weekdays, because we have 7 white keys until this thing called the octave repeats. But it is an additional note that Chris here notes, that if you were looking at just a weekday cycle, you could almost see it as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and etc. And I'm glad you like the name Sassafras. I was the one who picked the names of the cats. Dandelion is because he is dandy, he looks like a lion, and he's as fluffy as a dandelion. Sage, his brother, is soft yet sturdy like a sagebrush, which is a plant. And he is wise like a sage. And so I just wanted, sassafras doesn't really have a double meaning like that, but I thought it was a good plant name to fit in with those guys. So, somebody asked if I can play Flight of the Bumblebee. There are very few songs you will be able to request that I will instantly pull out, because not only is that less common than people realize, that somebody who plays piano has a bunch of songs memorized or has the sheet music ready, but I have been a little rusty on it. I was teaching up until a few months ago, involving a lot of piano lessons as like sort of a day job, private lessons I was giving. A lot of my students were piano based, so that gave me a little more practice I haven't gotten the past month or two, but even at those times, it got a little weird when everything went digital for a while due to COVID, and then due to me having to get surgeries. So it's been a while since I have spent a lot of time hanging around with physical instruments as part of my daily ritual. I've been doing more beat making, writing of song lyrics, and things like that. You know, of course, mixing the audio on our main episodes and such. Although the videos on this channel are a little more haphazard and rarely get edits. They can sort of go up as is. But I'm going to jump back a bit into some of the ways that I taught a lot of the students that I had a few months ago and, you know, for a period of years leading up to that I think are unique and that I think are, because of their mathematical nature, not only something that I will have my own combo class way of explaining, but also something that some of you may have a head start in. Like, even random seeming things may give you a head start here. Like, if you like math more, you may be more likely to know that 8 and 15 are both one more than a multiple of 7. Well, maybe you might get good at spotting how much more something is than a amount of 7s if you were counting weekdays a bunch, or if you were counting this cycle, the amount of white keys before we get the next identical cluster. Now, we could start the cluster wherever, and we can note there's a repeat. I'm starting from C up through B, are the name of these notes. This is another C through B. And these are identical patches. So, you know, these are each an identical patch. And if we want to jump to the next one, that's sometimes called the octave, which is a math root, like oct, 8, eighth, octagon, 8, an eighth, octave. So, you know, same root. If I play a note and it's eighth, essentially, together we end up with the note and a higher pitched version of what gets the same letter. And we can call that playing it with its octave. Or an interval that is an octave of amount. Now, octaves are fundamental in the universe. I'm less knowledgeable about how it works with the physics of sound, but it's something along the lines of a wavelength or frequency being doubled or halved whenever you go up or down an octave. However, in between the octave, like these separate ones are not as fundamentally distinct in nature. Humans decided we were going to cut the amount between that doubling and halving into 12, counting the black keys. Now, the white keys aren't like more important than the black keys or anything. They can all be shifted over, all the same patterns and stuff on the way that current pianos work. They're evenly tempered in this whole historical thing. But modern pianos, we can slide stuff anywhere. The white keys are not more important than the black keys. They just pop out at your eyes first. But that's one thing to remember, is that I'll be using the white keys more because they're easier to visualize some patterns. But anything we do on the white keys, we can find a way to make work on the black keys. If we shift everything, if you already have a starting point, you can't necessarily move other stuff and have it sound the same in relationship. So if I'm saying we can slide stuff and take our pattern elsewhere, it's not going to be like I keep part of it and I get to move that part. We're going to have to move everything like an equation. Like when you take an equation and you go +2 on each side. I divide each side by 2 now. Now I, multiply each side by 1.5. We're going to do little translations and rotations and stuff. Not rotations as much. Translations of them. Now, let's look at our comments here. To whoever said I'm not actually Ben Shapiro, God no. I've heard once or twice, if I have the wrong intonation, that I can say certain things maybe in the cadence he says, like the vocal inflection he says things. No, I hate that guy. That guy sucks. So, what songs do I enjoy playing on piano? I like writing songs and messing around and adding little lines and stuff, and there are various ways in which I've had fun playing piano as part of a thing. If you want piano to make its own whole song, that can be fun. I've tried to compose little pieces. If you want to fit in with a live band, that can be fun. And usually when I've played that, it would be along the lines of rock or funk or hip hop or things like that, or things that I've played a background rhythm to, like maybe there's a bunch of instruments, so I just want to go and just like hold some chords down in the background as opposed to doing some, some elaborate whole little solo or whatever. So right now, what I'm most into is creating songs, and the songs are more on the end of hip hop, although they have a lot of influences from a variety of genres that include classical that a lot of people associate with pianos, rock music that a lot of young people associate with like their parents or hippies or stuff, punk music that people associate with that. There's a lot of different things that I enjoy as genres that mix together in the music. I do hope to release before too long, but overall, the closest I would have to say is it's hip-hop-ish. There will even be involvement of me rapping, I will say, and I have actually dropped many rap mixtapes under other names in the past, and albums, and it's a whole saga of other names of rap projects I've dropped in the past, and other genres of music. But the songs I do plan to release this year at some point are rap-ish, but even if you don't think you like hip-hop or rap, definitely give a few of my songs a shot. And we can even mathematically deconstruct them later, and maybe they'll grow on you. Because I see songs as an opportunity to blend the line a little bit between, I guess I'm pointing at my hands the whole time. We'll look at me once in a while. To blend the line a little bit between the objective mathematical things you can calculate, which are where, maybe when I'm writing a verse of a rap thing, for example, where exactly in the measure a certain rhythmic thing hits, like a rhyme or other types of things used like consonation, assonation, alliteration, things like that. And, perhaps which pitch to a degree are you approaching singing, or what tone is your voice at? How much is it changing? There's a lot of mathematical analysis we could put toward rapping even, and beat making, absolutely. That is one of the most mathematical things. But I also see it as an opportunity to blend in the part of music that is hard to quantify, that just sounds good and cool and grips you by the heart or something. So when I do release music, it's not going to be songs to learn from. I mean, people who like math and science will probably get more references from them, but they're not like to learn from. They will hopefully be to sound good. Now, let's see, a lot of awesome people here. I'd also like to note, just since I saw the cat comments from earlier, and we may get more cats going forward, that the awesome George Carozzi, who was here earlier in the chat, might still be around, sent something cool to the mailbox that I still have to set up for a bit, but it's going to involve a new upgraded bird feeder. So that is now starting in action to get prepared. And there will be an upgraded, actually good bird feeder we're going to put somewhere above the classroom that's going to have some cool traits. The last bird feeder was this really cheap plastic one that I hung kind of low on purpose because it kept breaking anyway and I knew it would keep getting bumped. This bird feeder, we will find a good nook up in the trees and maybe it'll help us make more animal friends. We can also go out in the yard and see what the front yard looks like in terms of animals at night at some point, because you get plenty of wild creatures wandering around, and I don't just mean me. So, about our piano. Well, let me take a peek at a few more chat comments first. Somebody said they just realized both use modular 12. Yep. And there are some things that use mod 12. And the main one on the piano is the total amount of notes in the octave, which can be called the chromatic scale at times, is 12 before our cycle repeats. So let's look at how, like in mod 12, we said like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 0, 1, 2, 3, and etc. It was arbitrary that I called C a 0, but if I call C a 0 and I reset after 11, the next time I'm at 0, I'm going to be at the one that's supposed to be called C again. And same dealio with the clock. You know, you got your 12 hours. So when you loop back around, they wrote a 12 on top of clocks historically. Oh God, I'm getting all the combo class debris in here. I'll clean it up. When you loop back around, they should have called it a 0 historically. Not going to go into that too deep right now, but clocks should have a 0 on top, not a 12. But if we pretend the 12 is a 0, then clocks are basically just like mod 12. And if we pretend that a given note is a 0 and that I'm counting each like numbers, including all the black keys, then the piano is like mod 12. Now there's also, I mentioned a similarity to mod 7. I said, I got to bring out this clock too. And the reason for that is that within those 12 notes, you don't always want to combine all of those 12 notes to make a song. What if I wanted to tell somebody, these are the notes that might sound better with your song? Well, I can't tell them all 12 of those, because when we look at the 12 of them and their higher and lower pitched copies, that would be like saying play anything you want on the piano. So what if I wanted it to have a better chance of lining up together and having some way they weave together in some good patterns? Well, I could pick a set of those notes that might sound good together. And as many of you are familiar with, if you mess around with just the white keys, you have a better chance of it sounding like half melodic than if you're messing around with all the keys. And that's because if you are in the right starting point and with the right types of background noise, the white notes form what's called a major scale from the right context of where I started, the guy called C. If I start from the C, the white notes are this thing called a major scale that are basically the ones that we might most frequently include in a song that's driven around this chord. Of course, I might go out of key once in a while. Might sound good to leave the key here and there. We can throw in when you see a sharp or a flat symbol written in music, these little symbols that tell you to change, they can do that in the middle of the thing. Or they can tell you at the beginning, this is our key. Like, I am in the key of C. I mean, they're going to do both. They're going to tell you the key, and then they might also throw in what's called accidentals when they add a sharp or a flat or go out of key. But you're going to have a key that will assume for now, to keep it simple, let's not leave the key. Let's not do the little, I walked out of my key for a minute. Because we want to say, what are little stretches of like families of notes that sound good together in particular ways? And this one called the major scale is pretty useful. These notes, when lined up in different ways with a major chord, are pretty powerful. If you mix those up and stir them up, I would sometimes tell my students, like, all right, now just play them all in a row. Now you got to play them all in a row, but you got to change it somehow. And they're like, what do you mean change it? It's like, well, I don't know. You could switch two of them. You could make one an octave higher. You could make one come late. You got to change it somehow. So then maybe you end up with, maybe change the rhythm, or maybe you change the order. Or maybe you change how many times they happen even. And once you start applying a few glitches to your major scale, you're basically at a melody, something that actually sounds like unique and good for a song or whatever. So sometimes you can even mathematically cook a melody by taking something that's simple enough that it always sounds good with itself, so simple that if I put it in a line it's boring, and then shake up that line a bit to make it a little less boring. Take the, good sound of the major scale and then change its linear fashion of what scale implies out of it. As just a little term thing, if you hear key, a musical key, you might hear, oh, key, does that mean this? Like a piano key? No, key, musically it's confusing, means the set of notes that we are following, such as this major key. It's basically your default set of notes unless you're told otherwise. And that doesn't tell you necessarily which of them are going to play. It's almost which of them go down or up a little bit onto a black key. Because although I used the C scale as a good example, I can move all those patterns to a harder scale. Like here's A scale has 3 sharps in it if I do the major scale. And we can keep stacking them. E scale has 4 sharps. So why would you want to make it harder? Well, if you're a beginner songwriter, you might start on C, although you don't want all your songs to start in the same key. But even if I'm in the key of C, maybe I'm changing chords once in a while. Maybe at some point I want to go to an E chord. What if this was my chord pattern, C to E? Well, maybe when I'm doing my melody around with C, I'm looping on this little one cycle. And then when I'm on E, it's like, oh, maybe it actually would be better to not use just my key of my song, but to throw in some of the notes that were from that one's scale. So how could we remember all these messy, weird scales? Well, a lot of teachers teach it in the worst ways. A lot of music teachers are like, here's all these charts to memorize. This one has these letters sharp. This one has these letters sharp. This one has these letters sharp. And then it's like years later in a footnote, the student's like finds out or finally puts it all together themselves, hopefully maybe in those cases, that there's some really, really simple math behind it that lets you slide the stuff around. And so that's maybe why I was a good music teacher, isn't just because I don't mind chatting and I'm a teacher type of person who likes helping people learn and grow, but also because I like numbers. And although a lot of the kids were like, no, I hate math, I could sneak it in. I'd test the waters a bit. I'd be like, for the younger students, be like, how do you feel about math? Just casually. And if they like it, then I'm like, awesome, I got some cool stuff to show you that'll help make it easier. And if they don't, I can still sneak it in. I can maybe use some clock analogies or something like that. Now, I'm not going to do like worry about making this stream contain the perfect version of what I'm about to say, because this will certainly be an actual episode that will come out at some point that will demonstrate a much more thorough version of something I want to speed run say right now. Basically, since I'm at the piano, I feel like why not speed run a really quick thing or two about what I mean about these patterns being able to slide. But if you don't know any music yet, this might be kind of fast paced, and just stay tuned because I will make actual music theory lessons before long. I plan on, like I mentioned at one point, finding a time when I can go back to the shop I used to teach at. It's not super far from here. Before I was a private teacher, I taught through a shop. And I want to go back there because they have this huge wall of ukuleles and multiple keyboards and pianos and stuff like that. And it would just be a really cool backdrop for an episode. Like, I'll probably start the episode in the combo class, but then be like, well, time to go somewhere cool. And then we end up in a wall of ukuleles and such. So I'm going to plan a time sometime this year to see when my old boss, who I'm still friends with, is down for me to go after hours and film a combo class episode or two at the shop. And that'll bring back some fun memories too. And I might split the episodes a bit because there's tons of music stuff we'll do over time. And the first two main ones I want to do are kind of a duo. They're related to what's called major and minor blank. But the blank is that it might be best if I do a whole episode about major and minor chords and then a whole episode about major and minor scales. This is going to get extra mixed together right now. Now, or they might get mixed together into one episode in the end anyways. I often think things make sense to split, and then I come up with so many ideas for episodes that I'm like, oh no, we got to combine a few. So here, but other times it's the other way around. Other times I investigate an idea and I find even more than I thought I was going to find, and then I can't fit it in an episode and I have to split it. So the way that we could simplify the pattern that I was talking about of the major scale of C that looked weird on E is basically in terms of how many micro steps, the smallest increment I could go up. Pretend that going, I'm like +1, or if it's like +2. Those are called half steps or semitones, and we're going to call them half steps because a lot of teachers use what's called whole steps because some of, like a lot of the white keys are a whole step apart, which is a nickname for 2 half steps. With my students, I usually called that 2 half steps. I don't think that having the name whole step always comes in handy. Sometimes it's good to just be like, okay, we got whole, half, whole, half, based on which one had a black key between or not. But I prefer to see it as how many micro steps would it take to get to the next white key? 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. The ones are where there's not a, let me zoom in on this a little. The ones are where there's not a black key in between. So, like from here to here, had one in between. Here to here, had one in between. Here to here, didn't. So, if you know how to identify a C, which C is the note that's right to the left or right, what you don't really want to think about as left, except like on your first day. You want to start thinking first day like in Demotro classroom of music or whatever. You know, first I have to be like, that's your left and that's your right. You know that, right, kid? But then it's like, we're not going to think of that as left usually. Let's think of that as lower. Because if we can think of that end as being low and that end as being high, then it's the exact same as if I'm describing another instrument copying me or whatever. That's the lower sounding notes, the lower pitched ones. Those are the higher pitched. And so instead of saying left, right, I can say up, down. And down will mean, okay, I went lower in sound. Now, if you know how to find C, which C is the one that is directly down from a cluster of 2 in a row black notes. You get like 2 in a row, 3 in a row, 2 in a row, 3 in a row. Find a 2 in a row, go directly under both of them. Not in between them, that's in between. Right under both of them. Not too far, just right under both of them. That's a C. If you can find that, then you can look to the next C. And you can see that, okay, we have 2 to get to the next white, 2 to get 1. 2, 2, 2, 1. So you don't even need to memorize exactly the most important formula when you're at the piano, because it's sitting there looking at you. The fact that from here to here, the white keys are a major scale, which ones have a black key between them or don't, tells me a really important pattern. It tells me that the first note of a major scale to the second takes 2 half steps. The second to the third takes 2 half steps. The third to the fourth takes 1 half step. Or I could add up chunks. The first to the fourth of a major scale is a difference of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 half steps to what's called the fifth, because I have the note and the fifth of its scale, or like of its friends. It adds 7 in that case. Now, we already get a clock analogy here. 5s and 7s are pretty similar on clocks. I mean, they look like they're at a similar spot. You got your 5 there and your 7 there. We also, in mod 12, could once in a while want to call 7 -5. Once in an even rarer while, we might, for some reason, call 5 -7, which is allowed, but probably not very useful, because it's not the simplest congruence class, or the simplest member of the congruence class. Now, here, the reason that's similar to the piano is that if I look at this note called G right here, and I combine it with the C, well, that's, from C's perspective, I went up 7 half steps. And it's called a fifth that does that. Also, bonus fact, fifths are powerful enough that you don't need to be in a major scale, that a fifth, you don't need to call it a major fifth. Fifth is in what we're doing here. A minor fifth is also the same. We're not even going to probably get to minors in this stream, which is the other type of scale. But for major scales, this is a fifth that's plus 7. If I go to the next C from this G, well, I mean, you would have to know the G scale to confirm that that's even in the scale, but it is, and it is the 4th note from there. It's true that if you know that this is in the scale, and it's the 4th white key from there, counting it, that if it's in the scale, then it should be the 4th one of the scale for any major or minor scale. Each scale will use each letter once, some of which get pushed up for the types of scales that like what's called sharps, that push some up to a black key, and some get what's called flats, where they push it down. Sometimes you get a flat or sharp that sends you to another white key, but that's a story for another day. Now, here from G, this is actually a 4th, if I look at G to C there, because from G scale, that's the 4th. Turns out G scale's pretty close to C scale, it only has 1 sharp. Now, if that's a 4th, and I noted the 4th from here is 5 half steps, which is the same as C to its 4th, because they're both major scales, so we want the rules to hold, and they do. We can slide stuff. 4ths of a major scale here will, or of minor scales, will have this distance. And we can note that it makes sense that if this was 7, I kind of already knew this part was 5, because we said this amount was 12. So 7 plus 5 is 12. And so the 5th and the 4th are like each other's reverse in a weird way. They add up to an octave. sort of like 5 and 7 add to 12 on that clock. The confusing thing about these terms is that when I say 5th or 4th or 3rd, I'm meaning including the first one and only using the scale's notes that it likes, which there will be 7 of for each major or minor scale before it loops. And if I say go up 5 half steps, remember that means like go up these little tiny amounts, not counting the first one and climbing up to see our distance. Now, the cool thing about these patterns, there's whole webs of other cool things, like why is G the second simplest? There's a whole episode about clocks I have planned for some point that is very clock related, which is about why is G the second simplest? Well, let's see if you guys can see a pattern right here visually. So this is the starting point of the simplest scale. Doesn't have to be down here, but the letter C. For the major scales, I'm basing simplicity on how many sharps or flats it has. Now, and this has none. Now go, which are the black keys, how many times I have to weave up there. The next simplest on a certain direction of sorts, because there's a other land called the flat keys. Going to this land called the sharp keys, the next simplest starts with the letter G. The next simplest starts with D, then A, then E. I don't have to play them low to high, but they are each a similar looking spot from the last. They're each other's fifth, and there's this magic pattern about fifths called the circle of fifths. But here, I don't have time to fully get into all that today. Part of what I wanted to note here was that if I wanted to know any of these major scales, like if I wanted to know E, a lot of teachers are like, memorize that it's F, G, D, and E that are sharp. I mean, F, G, C, and D that are sharp. But I could just say, okay, I pick an E, and I'm going to copy what C did. C laid it all out for me. C told me what the pattern should be unslid. Or they're all slid without a reference point, but the least confusing version of all the possible multiverse versions of what that chord and scale could have been. C, we have whole, whole, half, as some teachers would say, or as I even prefer to think of it, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. And if I go that same amount up from my E, if I go plus 2, plus 2, plus 1, plus 2, plus 2, plus 2, plus 1, as if I was like just noting where there were or weren't black keys on the way from one C to another, that was the E scale. So that's all the major scales. And those are like, a lot of teachers make students memorize all the sharps in this one, all the sharps in that one, all the sharps in that one, before they explain some of those background patterns. And it's like, why? You'll get used to what they look like if you play with them enough. Don't worry. If you get into piano, you'll know what your major scales look like. But one of the first things I feel like students should be told that is not clear enough is that if you ever forget your major scale, just like look at a C to a C where there are or aren't black keys, turn that into 2s and 1s, and then copy that pattern from your new note. At the very least, it's a good double checker. At the very best, it weaves together with other patterns I'll show in the future in an even cooler way. Somebody says 88's not a multiple of 12. It didn't have to be a multiple of 12 necessarily. They didn't need to loop around or whatever at the top. Like, you can't loop back around. So if it was a multiple of 12, it wouldn't end and start on the same note either. It would, be it would have to be one more than a multiple of 12 if we wanted it to, for example, end and begin on the same note. And the 88 key is more about the human ear capacity. Human ears cannot, there's not really a reason to build more. I don't even know, is this one 88? But in general, past like 88 keys, you can go further, but the new keys get harder and harder for the human ear to hear. It's like tick, tick, tick. Like the low ones sound like thunder, and the high ones sound like a glass clinking. And it gets further like that as you continue to go. Like if you imagine how like this, I can hear the melody a lot clearer than, it gets further that direction of muddiness. And same with here where I can hear this a lot clearer than, and it gets further. This also probably could be tuned. Pianos do need to get tuned once in a rare while, and I don't really know the status of this one. I haven't been playing on it much, so like, who knows actually if it's perfect or not. Let's see. I'm going to take a peek at our comments for a minute. Thank you all for joining me for a different than usual type of stream. Although we might also, in fact, almost definitely will, devolve into other mathematical things that are more similar to what we often do in a moment. And that's because I downloaded some cool new interfaces of things that they're a little less about the modular cycles that we'll be looking at. And I'm not fully done with this, but in a minute, we're going to look at some other math stuff, and I'll lead there. Now, there's a lot of other instruments too. So another thing I might show before I switch gears is we could look at guitars, but maybe that'll be its own stream. How's a guitar like a clock? Well, of course, it has the same notes. This is a really cheap one, but it has the same notes as the piano, but a completely different way you approach them, and like a different amount of them you can make noise at a given time. So on the guitar, what you end up playing is going to be creating notes that are combos of these things, but done in a quite different way. So it sort of has its own clocks and stuff like that. There are some things that are easier on piano because they're easier to spot. And in fact, in general, more things are easier on piano than are on guitar, in my opinion. If like of the equal complexity, even just visually, the piano lays it out pretty well. Maybe I've just played it more over the years. But guitar does have one cool thing with this slidey thing I mentioned, which is that, so I mentioned like a chord would sound good in the background, which a major chord is the first, third, and fifth of the major scale. And so if you take any of those major scales we saw how to whip up, and you make the first, third, and fifth of it play, you get a chord. I'm getting a slightly better guitar here. Now, a cool thing about a type of chord you can make on guitar that's harder, that won't be when I give a guitar tutorial the first lesson, because it takes students like genuinely months to get comfortable with pressing down this thing called a bar chord that has like a different way of pushing than your typical chords. Here's a normal one. Here I have this like bar thing I have to do. But if you can learn to do the bar chords, they basically make everything slidable. These are all major chords because I have created a major chord shape. All the math going on here lines up in a way with the type of major chord I made there. Although in this case it's called an F chord. And since I said I can slide everything fairly in the equation, you can do like ×2 on each side or whatever. Then you can, I added 1 to everything in the equation. I added another 1 to everything, and it worked because I did it to both sides of the equal sign in my analogy. So also, if this was a minor chord, now I can make more minor chords doing it. So sometimes guitar even will have shortcuts with being able to slide some of the patterns to other spots. Like piano sometimes is easier to spot things or to like jump into if you were given a random chord and had to play it really quick. But guitar can sometimes be easier to move a pattern around and have it feel similar. Whereas if I move this all up a half step, it starts getting crazy already. Like I'm already on multiple black keys starting. You know, I'd be playing what's called a C sharp major or D flat major one. So when you move stuff on the piano, it suddenly looks different, but it's not actually. Secretly the same. All right. Somebody says the only intervals that would cover all notes if you repeatedly played the interval, and we're assuming we mean intervals less than a 12th, because sometimes, or I mean, we're talking about the major scale things here. So in terms of the major scale, you might sometimes say a ninth to mean like a second up there. There are reasons. But we'll assume we're under there. And this person noted that the only ones that would cover all notes, including the black keys here, I guess we're looking at, so that will be more of a mod 12, are 1, 5, 7, and 11. And that's because they're relatively primed to 12, this commenter Josh notes. And that's true and relates to our clocks. I made an episode once about how if you had an alarm that rang on a 12-hour clock, 1, 5, 7, and 11 are the amounts lower than 12 that would end up hitting every hour number. So same thing. Clocks and pianos, more similar than you realize. That's the 12s, and this one even, our weekday cycle that we use as humans, even encodes a bit of the two most popularly used type of scale, the major scale and minor scale. All right. So, somebody asked which scale has only one flat, and the comment is correct that it is F major. And that, remember how the one that was first was like the fifth from C upward? Well, to ask the first flat turns out to be like asking, what is C the fifth of? C is the fifth of F, and that sends us the other way. It's basically like a clock we're going to see of the complexity of the scales called the circle of fifths that literally will do a real quick picture of it right here, which, you know, will also be an important part of a music theory lesson I do need to show before long. And don't worry that this will make no sense right off the get-go, or let's get it ready. So this probably won't make sense for what you're seeing if you don't know music, but this is a very common diagram in music that's really awesome. And you gotta say, that looks pretty clock-like, don't it? It looks kind of like a clock where they put C at noon. Kind of reminiscent, like if you were first teaching someone about a clock, you might start talking about the 12 on top, and which should be a 0 on clocks. And I started with C. There's G and there's F. So this diagram, as well as another clock that I want to make that's a little more linear that leads up to it, will be pretty cool. We can even see a callback to a spiky shape that the Magic Fellow, one of my mods who also designed a cool animation for one of the episodes, made this spiky shape animation that showed in that episode I was referring to things like 5-hour alarms will touch all the numbers in like this type of spiky shape of where they go. But if I set an alarm every 3 hours, it's just going to touch in like a square, sort of. Every 4 hours would touch like a triangle. And so, which ones were the spiky shapes we saw lined up with multi-digit prime numbers in different bases? And it will also have some interesting applications here. When we were talking about how fifths are so important and how they are 7 steps apart and how they're like the flip of the fourth, and that's 5, and about the 5s and the 7s, the fact that 5 and 12 are co-prime and that 7 and 12 similarly are co-prime is extremely crucial for the scale that we have to work and to have gone down in history and worked ideally. Part of it only works because 5 and 7 are co-prime with 12. So that's a fun thing to dive into over time. I think I might switch our gears to a few little mathematical puzzles that I wanted to look at, or like little interfaces of sorts. And I think that since I'm not going to do too much more stream, probably, I think we're going to go back to the combo classroom with our lantern. Because we got, I think, what we needed from the piano for this little session. If anybody only cared about the piano and leaves, make sure to check out all the cool links in the description, like some bonus videos I've been putting out on this channel and some shorts and stuff. And make sure to stay tuned for a cool modular-based episode coming out on the main channel, the Combo Class 1, in a few days or so. The last one, too, about aperiodic monotiles, is also linked in the description. So, I'm not sure if the lantern will do much, so I might have to do the brightness quite bright on this and artificially, well, all of the lights are artificial unless when we're doing the fire, which I don't think we'll do right now. Will illuminate our scene. A lot of people have been commenting that they think the last few streams or video topics were cursed or something, and wondered if I was doing that on purpose. And I wasn't of any sort. I'm not always sure when something I do will come across to somebody as cursed or superstitious or stuff, but if you've been following Combo Class, you'll know that every once in a while, stuff like the number 666 comes up, or like, I like lighting candles at night, maybe they meant. I don't know. Some people have been thinking that we've been getting extra spooky, but I think that's just the Combo Class, how it looks in the darkness. So, I don't know. I like the nighttime streams out here. Maybe I'll light some of these candles in a moment. But the lantern and this type of thing are working for now. Now, let's see. Gonna take a peek at our chat here. Thank you. Somebody said they're going to put $40 into a poker machine. I wouldn't recommend that. Be careful. If you mean an online one, be extra careful, because a lot of those are built to take your money, and they're not going to share the real odds of stuff happening on there. If you mean in a casino, almost as bad. They're also built to take your money, but they have to be mildly more transparent with some people about what's going on. I don't really recommend poker machines, but do your thing and have fun. Everyone has, I'm not going to judge. Everyone has their own things that they enjoy doing. And personally, if I were to play a poker-related thing, I would prefer to play poker with humans, and then, especially if you're not even in a casino, because then the net amount of money stays the same. There's no, house secretly taking a bunch of stuff. So, my lab coat isn't here because I was doing a more casual piano stream today, and it is cold, so maybe I'll grab it. I often have it when I'm out in the classroom. Occasionally I haven't had it in indoor streams, and it is rarer, but I don't have it 100% of the time on. And I might grab it when I grab my charger in a minute, because it is actually on the colder end out here. And there's a cat. Which one is it? Which one is that? That's Dandelion. So, let's see. Which instrument holds the most notes, including microtones? Well, you could make instruments that slide in a continuum. So even on guitar, you can make a slide guitar and things like that. That, you know, theoretically are holding a whole continuum of notes you're sort of gliding between. So, let me grab the charger for this. And what we're going to look at in a moment is a few more of these cool little demonstration thingies from Wolfram. And we're going to warm up with one that shows an interesting proof that you folks can look at for a moment. Visually, I don't know, for those who saw my episode about what's called Ramsey numbers, and I mentioned briefly this type called multicolor Ramsey numbers. Well, it's basically asking if I have a certain amount of dots and I connect all of them in some amount of colors, when I'm guaranteed to have certain traits. Like in this case, what it's asking is, what's the minimal amount of dots that if they're all colored together, which is not going on right now, they're drawing which ones are connected red here, which ones are green there, and which ones are blue connections there. Really, these would all three be happening on top of each other. Like, there's the same set of dots these are describing. It just would be way too confusing if they overlaid it. And these are different ways we could cycle through them. And for any of these ways, with 16 dots, they're avoiding and finding certain traits. Leave a comment if you remember the bit when I talked about R333, and this is an interesting form of proof that that's more than 16. And this shows a similar thing, that they're flying through a lot of configurations that show that the third Ramsey number is exactly 6. Here, they're cycling to find that all of these contain a red triangle and or blue triangle, no matter how I color them. Now, I'm just going to leave these up on the screen because they look kind of cool. I need to grab the charger for this so we can keep going. And maybe grab the candles just in case. And then these aren't the main demonstration. I kind of wanted to just show those real quick. Thought they were neat. I have another thing about the golden ratio and a thing about polyforms that we can fiddle around with in a moment. One sec. Okay. I need to get a chair. I was using that for filming today. I'm throwing in more locations into the new episodes around this side of the classroom and front yard and stuff. Something I like to do when I have the time, which I will hopefully continue to have more and more of for combo class. And it can be fun to scatter around some different shots, such as cat cameos in the front yard, or that staghorn fern plant. Cool stuff like that. As long, and then that train sound goes, and I still haven't fully figured out my audio situation because I'm not a tech wizard. So whenever that train goes for like minutes in a row sometimes, doesn't matter much when I'm streaming, but we'll have to like pause filming for a minute or two. It'll be like, Carlo, let's just clean up the classroom for a minute. That train's going to be going a while. So thank you all for sticking around and hanging with me. I haven't been keeping as much of an eye on our chat in this random stream, but I did grab my lab coat again because it was cold, as well as some candles, and I pre-grabbed a few mathematical interfaces I want to play around with. Somebody notes it's 1 a.m. for them. It is not that late for me, but it is 11:30, so I should actually keep my voice not too loud while we're out here. So, for the neighbor's sake. Now, what I wanted to check out first for a fun visual is flipping through this thing called Polyform Explorer. This is cool. This is what I was waiting for, is like a little interface that had not only my pentominoes, for example, and these are my 12... Let's see, is that right? Yep, my 12 two-sided, as they're calling them here, pentominoes, meaning that they're allowing flipped copies to be treated the same as the others. These are all the ways of joining 5 squares next to each other in space. Many of you may know and or may have seen in my last episode, I used... my family has a... Okay, this is going to sound weird, but we have two Tetris board games. I don't even think I have 2 digital versions of Tetris. Now, I'm not even like a big Tetris fan, but we had this old Tetris board game. Someone bought a sequel-looking one almost as a joke or something, but now I have all these tetrominoes whenever I need to use them. And many of you are familiar with the one-sided tetrominoes because when they fall in Tetris, you do not allow flips. So like this is different than that falling in the game Tetris. And that was actually important in the monotile episode. Do we allow flips or not? But this is super cool. One-sided strip, what does that mean? I don't know. And what's those weird animal noises? You hear some weird animal noises out here sometimes. Now, when I was a kid, I had a set of pentominoes, the 12 that existed, and I loved them. And me and one of my friends tried to calculate what are all the 6s. This was before there was like... the internet was out at that point, but it was like... That would have been around the year 2000. I was pretty young. So, or maybe in the early 2000s when I was actually at the point of fiddling around with this. But I didn't have like access to the internet to just look that up. I'm not sure if it was on the internet at that point or if I just didn't have the access. But either way, it was better for my brain that me and my friend... Oh no, I opened something. That me and my friend tried to calculate all these. We tried to figure out what are all the ways 6 squares can go. Oh, shrink my camera more. Yeah. Good call. I'll keep an eye on the chat so that we have good stuff like that. Here we have... Sorry, what I was showing real quick was the pentominoes had 6. The tetrominoes would have 5, but we're used to 7 because we don't allow flipping in Tetris. And the level 6 that I was fiddling around with were these ones that me and my friend were trying to calculate how many there would be. And weirdly enough, the pentominoes do have some magically special traits They go into rectangles a lot better than the other polyominoes, and I need to buy a new set of these. If you get a little rectangular set of these as puzzle pieces, they can fit together in so many different perfect rectangles that fit every single cell, because 12 times 5 squares is 60, a very divisible number. You can turn these into a 3 by 20. You can make them into all sorts of dimensions. You can make them into a 4 by 15. You can make them into a 5 by 12. You can make them into a 6 by 10. All those are possible in many ways. 3 by 20 isn't as many ways, but there's some way to do that. Some of those rectangles have many ways to configure these in, but it's hard. It's weirdly hard. You have to sit with them for sometimes, if you're just trying to find a rectangle from scratch, just fiddling with them for fun, like chatting with friends or whatever. It can take like an hour before you bump into all of them lining up in a rectangle or more. As a kid, I must have spent many hours trying to find one before I got it to make a full rectangle, although I was pretty young then. You can also combine them into mini rectangles, so you can feel a sense of accomplishment when you're like, oh cool, I did get 8 of them in a rectangle, or something like that. I still have somewhere probably written down a picture of the first one of these I solved, the first rectangle of them I found. Probably in a paper notebook somewhere. In any case, this polyform thing is going to be so cool. This is going to really help us with some further investigations when we have to look at different combos of little cool shapes. And we are definitely going to have an episode about pentominoes at some point, and probably in general about what could be called polyominoes, which are the omino part basically is, for some reason the omino means square. Possibly the word root started with domino, because domino is in that family. This is the type of domino there is, which is literally a 2-mino. And nobody talks about the triominoes. Obviously the monomino, although we don't call it that, gets a lot of credit. The dominoes are like classic in society. Pentominoes get recreational math credit. Tetrominoes get whole games about them. Why does nobody give the trominoes credit? Maybe these trominoes need some more credit. The 2 ways of connecting 3 shapes in a plane. Whether it's one-sided or two-sided, or these other ways, we just got those 2. Now, that wasn't actually the main one I wanted to play around with. This was more me excited that this will come in handy in the future. This will be fun. I don't have like a math lesson planned about this right now, but I can already think in my head of plenty of math lessons that we could do related to this. So I'm going to shut this one for now and go to the other Wolfram Explorer that actually is a little more related to our next topic. By next topic, I mean the next main combo class episode I'm putting out. Like I mentioned earlier, it will be related to the Fibonacci sequence, but not necessarily about the golden ratio-like properties that we already saw in an episode not long ago. Related to something that a bunch of people have mentioned. I'm not sure I've gotten back to everyone who's fiddled around with this, but I've gotten some comments that have said things like, do you know the Fibonacci sequence has this sort of loop with its last digit every 60 terms, where it's like the 60th term will end in a 0, like the 0th term, the 61st and 62nd Fibonacci numbers I already know must end in a 1, because I know this pattern. And to those commenters, or to people who are expecting that, not only will we be jumping into that, but I will jump into how that's just the base 10 last digit pattern, and there are 2 ways we can take this further. The first way is there a point when the last 2 digits of the Fibonacci numbers start repeating copies of something we've seen before and fall into a cycle? What about the last 3 digits? So that's one direction your questioning could go. And the other direction it might go is, well, is this because base 10 is special? Or what if we counted in another base? And that's why it is a clock-themed episode. And actually, these clocks aren't even in it. There's a whole separate story, these melted clocks. But it's a pretty clock-ish episode and a modular episode. Like with many episodes that relate to different bases, when we're looking at patterns near the last digits-ish of a number, and to anybody who's an avid math YouTube viewer, I'll note this is coming out at a kind of funny time because the really good channel Veritasium made a video that's not at all related to this, but is about a pattern with the last digits of numbers that it's like, look, these last digits are staying and making a pattern. I just want to note to anybody who saw that, he did a good job on it. It's called p-adic number valuations, and we will cover them at some point. But that's not related to this. So just to make sure if anyone watches all the math YouTube out there and they were like either thinking I'm recovering that same thing or that it's related in some way, unrelated pattern to in the current on a popular sciencey mathy channel new video about this thing called p-adic numbers or number system, which we will also go into at some point in the future. It's a beautiful concept that's been requested. But this one is more just straight up modular arithmetic. If we look at the end of numbers in different bases, we can determine some of their traits based on these clock-like mods. And we're kind of going to take it a little further in this episode. In one way, it's just, well, time to see what the Fibonacci sequence does when we apply that Demotro mod landscape presentation. But in another sense, we're also going to go deeper, because one thing that we're going to start thinking about more so here is how I could even try and find patterns in the last multiple amounts of digits if maybe if I'm looking for a pattern in the last 2 digits of a base B, I could find a pattern about the last digit in base B squared. Because the exact combinations of the 2 digits I could have ending in some base B could be set as a bijection, a 1-to-1 correspondence, with all of the values we would have as single-digit symbols in that higher base. For example, to look at the last 2 digits of a number in base 10, where like mod 10 isn't getting us far enough. We sort of hit a brick wall at the ones place. We got a lot of data about that ones place, but what next? And what if we looked at mod 100? Well, sometimes mod 100 can give us clues about 2 digits in mod 10, which in this case, mod and base I'm using almost interchangeably, but to those who aren't fully aware, the mod is sort of this one mathematical system called modular arithmetic with a lot of beautiful patterns, and it ends up giving us a lot of the same patterns and a lot of clues about what other bases of writing numbers would do. But we're going to look at how there is a pattern in the Fibonacci sequences last 2 digits and beyond, and not just in our base. So since we were on prepping to that, I sometimes like to do streams that are for my more avid viewers, giving them little prequels of sorts to that. And part of today's was almost along those lines. The piano was a separate random idea I had when I had some extra time and had the living room to myself. But it did, in my head, line up with the next episode too, because they are about modular cycles. And although I won't use a piano to demonstrate that, because the piano, the physical version of the piano, hits an end where there's no more C's, it's easier on a clock where we can continue looping and keep hitting 12s, as opposed to, you know, like a physical, even a physical calendar is hard to do it on too, because it's not, it has a cycle, but it doesn't loop back as neatly as a clock. Now, I mean just the actual physical item, not the math within it. So it is in a way related to the piano stuff, because while we're not looking at music in the upcoming episode, we are looking at examples that I will use mod 12 and mod 7 and clocks and weekdays. And so if anyone wants some bonus mental exercises, you can think on your own or leave a comment on the video of how would the patterns I described apply to the chromatic scale of 12 notes on the piano, or of the half steps, or to the major scale, which had 7 different letters. How would some of those match? Because, you know, I bet if you extend your mind, if you imagined a piano had an infinite amount of Cs, then, and if my episodes were infinitely long, then I would have put in a cutscene about a piano with infinite Cs. Of course, the episode already is probably going to be 15 or more minutes without including that, so I cut it off while I was ahead, using my clocks and weekdays and such. And evens and odds, always a good jumping in point for mod stuff, you know. That's, if anyone wants to try your own question to train your brain leading into this next episode. Does the Fibonacci sequence have a pattern related to even or odd numbers? If there is some sort of pattern or cycle, why does it happen? And if even and odd numbers can be sort of expressed by what the last digit in binary would be, if the last digit's a 0 or 1 in binary, can you think of where we're going to go further? So, I'm mostly excited about the main combo class episodes, but I love doing my fun stuff. I mean, I have equal amount of fun probably doing my streams and filming for my main combo class channel. But really, those are the ones I'm most invested in because I get fun and pride from filming my combo classes. Now, somebody's saying they're publishing a paper on the Hodge conjecture, and they want a co-author. I'm going to be honest that doesn't sound that confident of a paper. If you're looking for a co-author from someone who either you've never heard me mention the Hodge conjecture, or you've heard the 1 or 2 times that I mentioned it, I said I don't know much about it. So I don't think I'm your co-author on that. I have studied it to a degree because the Hodge conjecture is worth $1 million. You get $1 million if you publish a good proof of it. So I want to make, not because I'm trying to hustle for that million. That's not going to happen for me. I'm not going to invest time in that problem. But I want to make episodes over time about different $1 million problems. The only one I'm really fully equipped to do is the Riemann hypothesis, which we even have a doodle of part of some of its representations of some things going on with the zeta function there. Very unfinished doodle. Unfinished question. But that's the only one that I'm like know enough about to make an episode about whenever it fits into my time frame. Any of the other millennium questions, I need to study more before I'm going to be ready to make an episode about. So I'm certainly not ready to co-author a paper about the Hodge conjecture. I would read over your paper, but remember, anyone who's approaching a millennium problem, don't have crazy expectations and be good at listening to criticisms. Because I want to go into these sometime. I've seen a lot of wrong papers and people who insist that because they think that the idea makes sense to them, that the fact that other people aren't understanding all the connections they think they have, they think it doesn't matter. It doesn't deter them that everybody doesn't see all the stuff that they're trying to lay out. But it's not enough to have an instinct that a proof's going to work or that it is the right way. The best gauge of whether something like a proof is correct is to give it to another mathematician, which is why I'm happy to read the thing. But be warned that if anybody writes a paper about a Millennium Prize problem, one of these $1 million problems, and I'm going to throw in the Collatz conjecture in there too. It has a large prize, although it's not included in the same list. If you write about the Collatz conjecture, that's a popular one a lot of people try, or the Millennium Prize problems, or twin primes, or some Goldbox conjecture, some of these big, popular, very researched through history things. If you have been working on your proof for less than a year and your proof is less than a few pages, unbelievably unlikely that you have gotten it, no matter how good it sounds to you. It's really, really unlikely that any of these will be cracked by anybody in less than thousands of hours and probably many pages. So just to warn anyone who's getting into proving big scale things like that, that wasn't toward the person who mentioned it. The person who mentioned it can definitely feel free to send it my way. I'm curious. I have my email in the bio. Feel free to send I might not understand it. I don't know that much about the Hodge conjecture compared to the stuff I make topics about. So I need to study up on it more. I did read a book about all the Millennium problems, so there was a chapter about that. But some of those questions are really complicated. You know, I try and be humble, and you're never going to know everything in math. So it's good to try and be like, okay, there's a lot of stuff I don't know and might never know in math. And I'm not sure if I will ever fully understand to the level that I could make an episode about proudly all 7 of the Millennium problems. Maybe throughout my life, I'll get an understanding for all of them. But some of them, to really get into what it takes, like where they're at in the research, what they know, what they don't know, which conjectures rely on other ones, and like if this is true, then that's true, and little staircases, can be really big to go into for a single problem. Now, this person said there's professors disapproved. I'm curious if you mean if they disapproved after they read it, or they disapproved of the idea of reading it. You know, if they disapproved of the idea of reading it, then maybe they're just busy and sure, I'll read it. If they disapproved from reading it, then, you know, see what criticisms maybe they had. Which, you know, you never need to quit first of all, you never need to quit if your thing doesn't go where you thought it was going. You can still try new things, even if you realize there was holes in your proof. Second of all, even if you never go anywhere with it, it's great for the brain to try stuff like that. So trying to prove things, I think, is an excellent mental exercise, makes people smarter. So feel free to try and crack all the big conjectures you want, and know that it's good for your brain as long as you know that these problems have been studied for long enough that it's probably going to basically, like, for someone who's like me, somebody who I don't think there will be a time of my life where I'm dedicating like 4 hours a day to a single problem. I have enough different things I want to do in my life. If you're like me and you think that there probably won't be, I mean, there are times where I've dedicated 4 hours in a given day to a problem, of course. But I mean, like, for a year, let's say. I don't think there's going to be a whole year in a row I would dedicate 4 hours a day to the same problem. That might be required to crack some of these things. So the goal you could have, which would be something that I'm like, hey, that would be cool if it happens someday, would be to create some little clue for a mathematician who's going to dedicate their life. Create a little chink in the armor of the unbreakability. Maybe that's something one of us can do. You know, maybe make a little advancement that shifts the sand the right way. when Fermat's last theorem was finally proven, which is an episode we're going to be doing before long. That's one of the upcoming ones, is about layers of what's still remaining after Fermat's last theorem in similar questions, and just about the history of that. I will note that, not only is that an example of one that took many, many pages to conquer, but it did also build on a lot of previous little mini steps. And so I'm more likely to contribute something of the form that the guy Ken Ribet did, maybe. He still very similar, but like there's a thing called Ribet's theorem that was used into Fermat's last theorem by Andrew Wiles. I'm less likely to pull an Andrew Wiles where you spend years of hours a day on the same problem. However, you never know. I didn't say it's impossible, because it's not. And in fact, a good example of maybe some are simpler than we realize is that new monotile thing. In the newest combo class episode, which is in the description, we talked about new shapes that are shockingly simple that answered questions that had been open for about 60 years. So, I mean, probably pondered even before that, but had definitely been like cataloged as being investigated since the 60s and not discovered until recently. And it was by what some call a hobbyist, because he wasn't someone who wrote massive long papers. He worked with a few other mathematicians to put out the paper they wrote. And it's a pretty simple shape, the first types they found, even the new ones, the specters. So some questions, maybe there's a secret, sneaky one hiding under the surface. I've always had this extra soft spot for wanting to see the twin prime conjecture solved. Not that that's even the end of the road. There's always more questions. What other constellations can or can't exist among primes? How many times? Finite versus infinite. But the twin prime conjecture, I feel like, is one that's going to come in the next decade or two, hopefully. It's just I'm not going to call it an educated guess. It's like half that I educated guess that the twin prime conjecture might get solved in 5 or 10 years. Not necessarily, but that there's a chance. And half that I'm hoping. So that's one that primes, it's a simple enough question that it can be approached from many different angles. Some of these things, like the Hodge conjecture, not only is the answer going to be really hard, the question's really hard to explain. Like, I don't even think I could properly explain what the Hodge conjecture is asking without butchering it. And that's even the case for like half of those millennium problems. Like when I said the Riemann hypothesis is the only one I was ready to make an episode about, I would say there's only a few of the millennium problems that I even feel like I could like describe right to someone. And that's after reading a book about them, because they're so complicated that it gets hard to think of how you describe them in a paragraph. Now, I don't know enough about the Hodge conjecture. That was a little tangent about some rare things. Wow, you wrote a 51-page paper. That seems like a good, cool amount of work. I'm impressed by that. So feel free to send your paper to the email that's in the description here. I'm pretty bad at getting back to emails these days. I will get better at that. I'm an old-fashioned guy. I got to get into my brain that I need to have, like, I check my email each day, because I do want to get back to all the people who are awesome, who have reached back, who I am sometimes late to communicate with via email. Feel free to bug me if you think I'm just late. But it's not against any of you. It's that I don't like checking emails, because not only is it stressful for a lot of people to check emails, but I don't like technology, and I need to get better at that. I will get better at the amount I love to write on my computer, because I've gotten used to that on Word documents. I need to transfer some of that love into wanting to like email more people. So somebody said they want a video about infinite series. There will be one of those before whatever episode I make about the Riemann hypothesis, because that other $1 million question I mentioned is about infinite series of sorts. I mean, it's about a particular function that is an infinite series, but then it's about the analytic continuation of that, and it's on the complex plane, and all these extra things going on, apart from it just being I add numbers. So to lead into that, we are going to do one that's just about infinite sums. I've made a few shorts, but I definitely want to compile all the stuff from those, as well as stuff I haven't shown yet, into one episode that is going to be somewhat my pre-Riemann hypothesis episode, and somewhat my, hey, check out my favorite infinite sums. Look at these wacky sums. Because some of them have really cool results that they converge to. Or like some that you don't think will go to infinity but do. Some you think would but don't. Some of the ones that don't go to like pi or e or something. So I'll show you my favorites sometime. There's one that's so crazy. There's one I've saved because sometimes my favorite, craziest math stuff is so good when I find it that I'm like, this has to be a whole episode, and I don't want to spoil the arc of the episode to anybody before. So my favorite infinite sum that does something really weird with the value it converges to, I have not shown yet. I'll have to put that in the episode. No, maybe not like favorite, but like definitely the weirdest. And negative 1/12. I've already gone into that in the past, so I will say very quickly only. The natural numbers do not add up to negative 1/12. There's a form of summation that you can do that assigns a value of negative 1/12 to the natural numbers. But let's not translate a form of summation you can do that has a value assigned to, adds up to. Like a lot of people, it's a common math thing that people think that all the whole numbers add up to negative 1/12. We'll get into why that's actually cool. Like what is actually happening? Why did they assign a value of negative 1/12 to it sometimes? But they don't add up to it. In any case, that was many tangents. The last thing I wanted to show here was related to, this is mostly related to the golden ratio, but I was sort of doing it as a prequel in case you spot any Fibonacci-esque traits for our next episode, which will be about the Fibonacci sequence. More so, this will be a reflection on, we've seen briefly how to make a golden ratio base in an episode. We went by that pretty quick, but we saw it's possible. And then we saw more details about why that would have worked so well in a more recent episode about the golden ratio, where we saw this number has this weird trait where its 0th power plus its first power is its second power. Its first power plus its second power equals its third power. Its second power plus its third power equals its fourth power, and so on. Its powers are a Fibonacci-esque sequence. Now, let's see how we can note that sort of working in a weird way here. This is related to why what we're doing here is going to be, we have a number, and now we've gone up to the number 2. So now things are changing. This is how it's going to look in the simplest version in the golden ratio base. I say simplest version because kind of like how point infinite nines equals 1 in the real numbers, you get a funny one in the golden ratio base where you can turn, because you have this power plus this power is that power, you can turn a 1 in this spot and a 1 in this spot and a 0 in that spot into a 1 in that spot, a 0 in that spot, and a 0 in that spot. You can sort of turn 11s into 100s. And so there's like a proper representation for the golden ratio base here, base phi, that avoids 11s because they need to pick one way or another. Do we do the 11s or the 100s? We go with the 100s. And I just wanted to show this fun interface of the representations of the numbers and what's really happening within them. Let's make this a little bigger. So, 3 looks like that in the golden ratio base, 100.01. And that's because they're doing this sector of math, which is mathing it all out to prove that it happens. But we get these magical relationships where there was a 1 somewhere in there from it being the 0th power. And then there's a staircase-like thing where any 2, one of each of them adds up to the next one. And it ends up working that when we staircase down below the 1, we can use reciprocals and golden ratios to always combine in the right way to get our integers. Here, 3 is 1 of the golden ratio squared's place and 1 of the reciprocal of that. 3 is like that. 4 is like that. Although we could have written it 110 because the 11 they kicked out and stretched to the 100 form, considered more standard. Now, it has grown rather late where I am too. I just realized it passed midnight not long ago, and I don't want to be the neighborhood nuisance to all of my neighbors. So I'm probably going to log off our stream pretty soon and vanish into the darkness before long. No, actually go inside and work on some stuff. But leave any last thoughts or comments. I'll take a scroll back through our chat. Thank you to all of our combo lords who joined for our bonus stream. This was a pretty casual, random one where we weaved through a few topics that will get explained in more detail when we do music theory lessons. But figured it was a good time, and I always like doing a little extra live stream to teach some more stuff to my combo lords. And make sure that you're tuned in. I don't know how soon it'll be, but in a few days from now, for my Fibonacci going around weird clocks in different bases episode coming out on the Combo Class channel. There's also other cool stuff linked in the description. So before I end the stream, make sure you have found whatever links in there you haven't seen yet. Also a Discord where we got a lot of cool combo lords chatting and various other cool things like that. There is a Patreon for anyone who's extra helpful with the combo mission. And I think I will log off now that we have past midnight a bit ago. Looked at some piano and golden ratios and the darkness. So, final clock view. Love you all combo lords. I will see you later. And